Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, so where do you come down on this? Because obviously we have not done well by people by leaving them naked on the streets to eat cereal, cardboard boxes. But on the other hand, I am afraid of expanding government power. How should we think about this? And what are some things that we might want to think about as we contemplate?
Well, I think you summed it up beautifully just a couple of minutes ago when you said this one is tricky. It is tricky. We used to have 500,000 beds in mental institutions for people with mental disorders, and now we have about 40,000. It was actually during the Kennedy administration in the early 1960s, speaking of Rosemary Kennedy, who was instrumental in ending the mental institution frenzy, I guess you could call it, because the people in those institutions were often very, very much abused, and they were not being helped very much. And the concept was, let's get them out of there. Let's get them around normal people. Let's get them outpatient care. Let's get to the root of the problems. So these are very ambitious goals, obviously. Have they been met? Not very well.
No, so I guess we did not do that by letting them.
No.
Right.
But you, when you say this is tricky, that's, I would say, is an understatement, because the problem is who is going to make that decision that someone on the street is mentally ill and should be hauled off against his or her will to a mental institution where basically they lose all their rights, as you said yourself. And do we want a country like that in which potentially millions of people, 1% of the population in many places like Los Angeles is on the street? Do we want to give that kind of power to the government? I don't. I think we should go back to the very ambitious goals that people had years ago when they shut down these institutions. Get to the root of the problem. I remember I interviewed for a show I interviewed Laura Bush, President George W. Bush's wife, who was a mental health advocate, and she'd actually written a book on this subject. And she was saying, and I'm saying now, let's go back to those ambitious goals. Let's get to the root of these problems. Let's get people outpatient treatment. Let's provide places for them where they can get off the street besides criminalizing them and sending them to jail. So in other words, let's create more housing for them. That's a way to get them off the street. It's just to create more housing for them. But what Trump is saying, I find very worrisome, because we're talking about trying to recreate 500,000, 1 million or more beds. So that's a multi-billion-dollar project that would take years. And again, it would put homeless people into a very, very dangerous situation. Would put all of us into a dangerous situation, because you would be empowering somebody or other, maybe the police, to make a judgment and say this person is mentally ill, and haul them off and lock them up and then take away their rights.
But yeah, it's like two extremes, right? Because we don't want to see, you just drive down the streets of Los Angeles, drive down Kensington Avenue in Philadelphia, or I was just in Philly yesterday, and I just saw a guy just like standing there, like digging through, looking for like cigarette butts underneath a tree, and just, like who's going to make that assessment in these cities? That's one extreme, where they just let them just live, in these liberal cities, just like let them walk the streets. Can we learn anything from the Portuguese drug model? Famously in Portugal, of course, they decriminalized drug abuse there and got them the help that they needed, and it's been a model for the world. Is there anything to learn from the Portugal model as it relates to homelessness?
Well, it's not just Portugal. There are other countries, including England, where they provide housing for people who need housing. no matter what their condition. And so you end up with very few people on the streets. Do we do that? No, we do not do that. That's a pretty good start. So looking at other countries like Portugal or other European countries, which in figuring out what they do, maybe that's where we should start. And I think the bottom line is it starts with having housing available for people who are on the streets so they don't have to be on the streets. I'll give you a statistic here, which is very frightening. We talk about crimes committed by people who are homeless. They're mainly non-violent crimes. They're usually arrested for things like loitering. But the rate at which homeless people are murdered, for example, in San Diego, where I am right now, is 20 times the rate at which housed people are murdered. 20 times the rate of murder of homeless people. So they're very much in danger by being on the streets, either because of mental illness. In fact, a lot of them are not mentally ill. They've just gotten out of jail and can't find a job because of their history. And so a lot of them are just ex-cons who are on the street. The first and foremost, we need to provide housing, and not in mental institutions, just very basic housing. A lot of countries consider that a right. We do not. And that's one of the main reasons we have so many people on the street.
But we're able to
have a question.
We're able to house illegal immigrants in America, though. That's been great in Chicago and New York City, and we spend money there.
Now, something that bothers me a lot is the expanding definition of mental illness. And it bothers me because of the social contagion element when you see the royal family telling everybody that they're not that mental health is the biggest concern. You don't feel good. You have mental health issues. Let's destigmatize it. What I see, because I've read the work of Thomas Szasz, is the government convincing us, as he warned about, that there is no difference between discomfort and disease. And what happened then is that we have a larger and larger population on mental drugs, on psychosis or drugs for mental discomfort. That worked well for insurance companies because they didn't have to pay for institutions. They could just pay for the drugs. And then it again expands the power of the government, pharmaceuticals, and doctors. Is there any way to put that horse back in the barn now that we have such a large population of people who think they have mental illness?
Well, let me surprise you here. I'm going to attack my own profession because you didn't mention the mental health profession itself. The mental health profession is one of the major forces behind this tendency to call practically anything a mental illness. This got completely out of hand a few years ago when the American Psychiatric Association released the latest version of the DSM, which is the book that's used for diagnosing mental disorders. And they added a lot more disorders to it. I think there are now more than 400 disorders. And they even added, this was very controversial, but they added grieving for the first time as a mental disorder. Why would they do that? I mean, grieving is healthy. Grieving is a positive thing. But when they do that, what that does is that increases income and traffic to therapists. And it forces the insurance companies now to pay for people who are grieving and who go to a therapist. So a lot of this is about money. And unfortunately, my own profession, the mental health profession, is helping to drive this very dangerous trend of just pathologizing practically any kind of discomfort that people have, a lot of which is fairly normal, and a lot of which, like grieving, is actually very healthy.
Gosh, you mean to tell me money is at the heart of it? Unbelievable. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that gambling is going on inside this establishment.
Well, I'll tell you one more thing here quickly. Because I was editor-in-chief of Psychology Today when the latest version of the DSM came out, and we wanted to review it. The American Psychiatric Association would not let me, the editor-in-chief of Psychology Today with a PhD from Harvard, they would not let me look at the advanced copy. They rushed it into print because they were on the verge of bankruptcy. They rushed this new volume into print, which is now being used in much of the world for diagnostic purposes, even though the statistical data they had was to support it was horrible. But again, they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and they make when they release that diagnostic manual, that brings in another $100 million directly to the professional organization, and then of course much more than that going to therapists and counselors and other mental health professionals.
I've even read of a disorder that was proposed by German psychiatrists. I don't think it ever was added to the DSM, called post-traumatic embitterment disorder. If you're just bitter about something that happened to you, you have a mental disease because you're still pissed about it. That to me seems, I mean, that's what I do every day as a wife.
I was going to say, that's women.
That's how I roll.
Women,
That's
doctor.
not a mental disorder.
I've always known they were nuts. Now we get to the heart
Okay,
of the matter.
I once wrote a piece for Psychology Today. I think it was the first piece I ever wrote for them that was called Our Shrink's Really Crazy. And it was about the mental health problems of mental health professionals. The suicide rate at that time among female therapists was about 3 times the national average. I mean, the field itself attracts people who have a history of mental illness, or at least they have it in their family. And we encourage those people to enter the profession because we think they're going to be more empathetic. So this problem is tricky. It's about as tricky as it can get. And I bottom line here, though, I want to get back to where we started, is I don't think that President Trump's suggestion that we recreate the insane asylum model, I don't think that's the solution to this problem. I think that's moving in a very dangerous direction. It's a slippery slope, which puts many, many millions of Americans in jeopardy, because again, who's going to make that judgment? And once that system takes you in, I can tell you this because I've worked in that system. Once that system gets hold of you, they don't let you go, because you're now a bed and you're bringing into some facility or other several $100,000 a year. Often that's government money, meaning it's taxpayer money paying for that bed.
Yikes.
Yeah, and who's going to foot? It's like the prison industrial complex right now. Who's going to foot the bill for all of these insane asylums? Right? It's going to be a big moneymaker, just like all the prison industrial complex.
Yeah.
Dr. Epstein, thank you so much. This was really fascinating, and I found it illuminating, to say the least. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I have lots of other things I can talk to you about, so I hope I get to another invitation from you. It's very nice to meet you both. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Great to see you.